Chapter 1. Climate Change. Dr. Casper Dodds examined some charts. These were the very same charts that spent the last 3 days lying on his desk. Each chart contained a report and some graphs that described a specific research project or experiment that was ongoing in the department. They were left there by a few of his research aides. Said charts tended to accumulate until they reached the critical mass required to piss him off enough to deal with them. The critical mass seemed to be around 32 reports plus or minus 4. Dr. Dodds took a sip of coffee as he paged through the accumulated pile. He paused to relish in his sip of coffee.
Coffee was an extremely rare luxury in Swift City these days.
The northern climate of Swift City wasn't conducive to growing Coffea arabica or Coffea canephora plants outdoors. Indoor growing space was extremely limited and required for uses that were deemed a necessity. As a consequence, most of Swift City's coffee production was the result of houseplants. The egg department at SCSU controlled some special greenhouse real estate that was allocated for the sole purpose of coffee production. It was only through his connections in the egg department that he was able to secure his own supply of coffee beans. Needless to say, Dr. Dodds, or as his friends called him, Cass, was very thankful he made enough credits to be able to afford his daily fix of coffee. Tea was much easier to grow, and it was much cheaper on the open market, but he was never much of a tea drinker. It just wasn't the same as coffee. The difference in quality was enough to justify the cost, in his opinion. He set his coffee mug down and reclined in his seat. He continued to page through the charts until he got to the second to last one in the pile. He read halfway down the page. There, he stopped in amazement. He couldn't believe his eyes. He reread the page to the same place. Then he jumped up from his desk, almost spilling his precious coffee in the process. "Holy crap, they've actually done it!" he exclaimed to anyone within earshot. Without another moment of delay, he ran for the door. This was his first time running anywhere in years. It only took a few strides down the hallway for him to remember why he didn't run more often, but despite that, he didn't stop. He didn't want to miss the test the report talked about. It had the potential to change everything. Dr. Dodds dodged a few students in the halls. All of them appeared to be very surprised to see him running about the department. If he wasn't on the verge of having a heart attack, he would have found the looks of confusion to be extremely amusing. He could hardly blame the students for being amazed at the sight of him running. After all, it was rare to see a grown man running, much less a professor. Dr. Casper Dodds was one of the leading professors of human physiology in the nation. That kind of status afforded him some unique privileges. It allowed him to focus his time on research, specifically the kind of research he wanted to conduct. He was at SCSU solely for the purpose of pumping out research papers. Occasionally, he'd teach a class to keep the dean happy, but beyond that, his time was spent almost entirely on research. This was the way he liked it. SCSU afforded him that privilege. He could have easily gotten a more prestigious position at some fancy Ivy League school, but there he would have been a moderately above average fish in a big pond. The Ivy League was filled with nationally recognized researchers. He would still have to write grants and spend time groveling for research funds. At SCSU, it was different. Out here in the sticks, he was a giant fish in a small pond. SCSU was happy to have him, and as a reward, so long as he continued producing results, he received all the funding he could ever ask for without having to waste any of his time writing grants. It was glorious, or at least it felt that way until Z-Day. Everything was great up until Z-Day. Then things went downhill substantially. Life changed for everyone that day. His life was no exception. Shortly after the walls went up, when things were settling down, Cesar Ricardo reached out to him with a pretty big request. Cesar asked him to personally lead a special project for the greater good of the whole city. Cesar said he asked around and received unanimous feedback. Apparently, everyone at SCSU said that he, Dr. Casper Dodds, was the best person for what Cesar planned. How could he say no to that? Cesar wanted a team of researchers assembled. Their sole focus would be studying the zombies full-time. He had a long list of questions he wanted to be answered, and he wanted Dr. Dodds to work towards getting those answers. Most of the questions were pretty obvious. Cesar wanted to know how the zombie virus worked. He wanted to know if it was in fact viral or if it was caused by some other sort of pathogen. He wanted to know what the exact incubation period was. He wanted to know how zombies behaved in certain situations. He wanted to know why they were so strong and why they were aggressive towards uninfected people and not each other. He wanted to know if they maintained any degree of higher level brain function. He wanted to know if the zombie condition was reversible. Overall, he wanted to know a lot of stuff. Dr. Dodds had the exact list saved on his computer. That initial conversation with Cesar was the starting point for the last 3 months of work. Dr. Dodds and his team logged an impressive 23,000 hours of work toward answering all of Cesar's questions. As usual for scientific endeavors, their initial list of questions seemed to be growing exponentially with the number of answers they managed to find. Despite that, they were making definite progress. For instance, they now knew for a fact that the zombie virus was indeed a virus. It was actually similar to rabies, but it was also rather strange. It incorporated characteristics that had never been observed in nature prior to its examination. That meant that either the virus was man-made or that it was from a viral lineage that was undiscovered. It appeared to be transmissible through saliva and blood. However, it was not transmissible through the air in the traditional sense of an airborne virus. Obviously, if someone spit or sneezed on you while you had your mouth open, you'd probably get it. But just being in a room with someone who was infected wasn't guaranteed to cause additional infections. Put more concisely, standard respiration wasn't linked to a statistically significant increase in airborne viral load. Moreover, the incubation period seemed to be somewhere between a day and a few minutes. It was tricky to determine the exact incubation period. It's not like they could march in human test subjects for clinical trials. Trial and error of that variety, although efficient, was abhorrently inhumane. Infecting rats also seemed like a bad idea. The last thing they needed was a zombie rat loose in the building. So instead, they used aggregated eyewitness reports and cell cultures to develop a rough estimate. From that data, they determined that the exact incubation period was related to the magnitude of viral exposure along with the exposure location's proximity to the brain. From what they could tell, getting bitten on the neck would result in complete infection within a matter of minutes. Getting bitten on the arm or the leg would lead to infection within a few hours. Exposure from viral inhalation or ingestion could take up to a day or not be infectious at all. Interestingly enough, the virus, although terrifying, wasn't an instant kill. Much to everyone's surprise, the human immune system was actually capable of fighting off small quantities of the zombie virus. In other words, a single viral particle wasn't a death sentence. Not even 1 million viral particles worth of exposure was a guaranteed death sentence. However, the odds of survival went rapidly down from there. During the initial weeks of experimentation, when they started cultured cell exposure testing, they discovered that the actual mechanical means of infection were remarkable. The Z virus would breach the cell wall first. This alone was common and nothing special. The virus would blow its load of genetic material, and then it would actually drop off the cell to move on to another host. Each virus could do this 2 to 3 times. If that wasn't crazy enough, the genetic material was where the real magic was hidden. The RNA the Z virus released would go to work completely retooling the host cell. The finished product was something that almost didn't resemble the original cell. The Z cells, the name Dr. Dodds very unoriginally gave the infected human cells, would begin to produce clones of the virus, but viral production was actually rather limited compared to most viral infections. Instead of spewing out tons of clones, the Z cell would restructure itself in a process that was remarkably similar to cellular optimization. The end result was Z cells that were more metabolically efficient while also being capable of producing limited quantities of Z virus particles. On top of that, so far all of the research indicated that the Z virus didn't actually cause host cell death in most cases. This was atypical for most viruses. The only exception was when the virus infected certain types of nervous system cells. Those it seemed to like killing. It was still on Dr. Dodds' wish list to get one of the infected into an MRI, but no one knew of a good way to do that yet. At present, research progress was slowing dramatically. Dr. Dodds suspected it would stay that way until they could access live specimens in greater numbers. So far, almost everything they knew was inferred through studying remains. At any rate, moving well beyond the cellular level, the current working theory around the department was that the virus worked by amping up the body of the host while also causing apoptosis in the region of the brain responsible for higher brain function. This seemed to result in a primitive creature that was stronger and faster than a normal human. Said creature would be mostly brain dead and on a constant epinephrine high, which explained the heightened violence and anger. In terms of behavior, it was clear that the infected possessed a kind of heightened awareness. One of Dr. Dodds' students suggested that it might be the result of not having the distraction of higher-level thought. She observed that the zombies tended to mill around looking for food most of the time, not dissimilar to how a very unintelligent predator might search for food. Likewise, they were drawn to sounds and smells. They seemed to ignore other infected. It also seemed like they were incapable of communication. Overall, the zombies were slightly less delicate than humans. They didn't seem to feel pain, so trauma that would normally cause shock in a standard human wouldn't really affect the zombie. With that said, they were still fully limited by the laws of physics. They had metabolic requirements, albeit much lower ones than regular humans, thanks to their Z-cell enhanced energy efficiency and partially dead brains. They weren't immune to bleeding out. Being shot or stabbed in joints, neural pathways, the heart, or in the head had the same general effect on the infected as it did on regular humans, minus the pain, of course. In a sense, the zombies seemed almost like a failed attempt at being greater than normal humans. Thanks to the Z-cells, they healed much faster than regular humans. Their cells divided much faster than normal, but it wasn't absurdly fast by any means. For instance, it seemed to take a Z-cell about an hour to divide. Regular human cells took multiple hours to pull off the same division. Hansen refused to allow it until just this last week, but Dr. Dodds' team was finally permitted to have the SCDF procure them some living specimens to study. This was obviously extremely dangerous, so it's not like Dr. Dodds was surprised by the delay. However, he explained on numerous occasions that the lack of living specimens, or rather the lack of specimens not filled with bullet holes or missing parts, was seriously hampering the progress of the research. Hansen finally caved to this line of reasoning after a month of no significant developments. 2 specimens were subsequently captured in North Shore by a team of DEFSO guys. Once the specimens were incapacitated, they were brought into the city within a completely sealed containment unit. Said containment unit had a rather excessive number of built-in contingency features. Not only could it physically crush what it contained, but it could also dissolve its contents in acid while simultaneously torching everything in a 100-foot radius. The containment unit was brought into the city and over to a secure location in the SCSU medical department, where it was under 24-hour surveillance by an armed hazmat-clad subjugation squad of 25 SCDF soldiers. During his first encounter with the subjugation squad, Dr. Dodds noted that 10 of those soldiers were equipped with rather menacing flamethrowers. Following the arrival of the living zombies, the healing factor hypothesis was the first thing they tested. From what they could tell, the zombies could do a month of healing in about a day. However, much to everyone's disappointment, they couldn't regrow missing limbs. It was, however, discovered that they could regrow fingers and toes. Dr. Dodds didn't like thinking about how that was tested. Needless to say, it was a good thing the zombies didn't feel pain. Having 2 specimens around provided opportunities for a wealth of other observations. For example, zombies didn't seem to need to sleep. They could be kept active for multiple days in a row with no noticeable side effects. They did, however, seem to have something that resembled a dormant state. If they weren't receiving stimuli, they would just mill around aimlessly. Beyond that, the hope for a cure looked pretty grim. A cure would essentially be fatal. Scientifically speaking, it looked like it would be possible to do something about the virus itself, but the damage it caused to the brain was irreparable with current medical technology. A treated zombie would result in a brain-dead person that was no longer infectious, a state that didn't have much merit. With that said, Dr. Dodd suspected that it might be possible to develop a vaccination against the Z virus. If it was administered before infection or before brain death occurred, it could prevent or reverse the virus. Depending on exposure levels and timing, some brain damage might still occur, but if caught early enough, it could be little enough damage to allow continued cognitive function at a near normal level. Unfortunately, he and his team still hadn't figured out how to develop such a vaccine yet. The virus was really perplexing in that respect. Since it genetically altered every cell in the human body, the only way to fix it once it got started was to use some sort of gene therapy to repair the altered cells. That kind of technology was still far beyond current SCSU capabilities. A lesser option that was closer to current technology was perhaps having infected cells commit suicide, similar to how cancer is treated. This would obviously only work in really early stage infections, but that was about the best they could hope for with current technology. In light of that, his current recommendation to Cesar was that the only way to deal with the current situation was to search out and destroy the infected in the hope that if all of the carriers are eliminated, the Z virus will eventually die out. This is where Cesar's grand hypothesis came into play. Dr. Dodds finally arrived at the secured zone. He was completely out of breath and probably on the verge of cardiac death. He certainly let his excitement get the best of him. As he concentrated on breathing, he made a mental note that he should really take better care of himself. He hadn't even run a quarter of a mile, and he was still just about dead. After he was feeling well enough to stand up straight again, he pulled out his security credentials. He swiped his card through a scanning field, then he paused for a facial scan. With a loud beep, the door in front of him opened into a large airlock. He stepped inside and then resumed trying to get his breathing back down to a normal level. He didn't want to show up panting. The door behind him automatically snapped shut. What followed next was a 2-minute wait. Although he thought of it as an airlock, what he was actually in was closer to an airtight flash oven. It was the only way in and out of the high-security lab where the zombie specimens were being held. If containment failed, the zombies would need to come through here or burrow their way out through 2 feet of concrete. This chamber was capable of pulling a vacuum or heating the air inside to 500 degrees Celsius, almost 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, in about 10 seconds. Both options were highly fatal to humans and zombies alike. The heat was more than enough to reduce everything inside the chamber to ashes. Naturally, it created a sterile environment, which is why it was built for this application. After another minute of breathing, Dr. Dodds finally fully caught his breath. Although he was a bit sweaty, he now felt normal again. A minute later, the door on the far side of the chamber swung open, allowing him to enter the laboratory. Inside, several dozen lab coat-clad researchers clustered around an observation window. They were all eagerly watching the conclusion of the most important zombie experiment performed to date. One of the researchers standing next to the observation window turned to see who was entering the lab. Upon seeing that it was Dr. Dodds, the researcher smiled and ordered a pathway cleared to the front by the glass. This allowed Dr. Dodds to weave his way through the group of researchers to the front of the crowd. He gave his path maker a smile of thanks when he reached the front. Prior to his arrival, the group was fixated on a 10 by 10 by 10 foot steel structure. The structure was covered in a mound of spray foam insulation that was several feet thick in all directions. The only part of the steel cube that wasn't covered was the man-sized glass hatch that acted as both a door and a viewing port into the chamber. From afar, the whole structure looked like a very steep hill covered in dirty snow that was sprouting a bunch of weird-colored plants. A closer inspection revealed that the plants were actually dozens of wires emerging from the foam insulation. The wires were connected to a large number of sensors and cameras that were installed inside the steel cube. From the cube, the wires ran to a nearby table that was loaded with data collection equipment. The loud purr of a portable industrial HVAC system could be heard in the background. The HVAC system was the driving force that allowed the steel cube to act as an environmental chamber. The chamber was Swift City's newest toy. It didn't exist until about a week ago. It took a team of 30 engineers from the mechanical and electrical engineering departments to cobble it together. This was done at Dr. Dodds's express request to facilitate the testing Cesar requested as quickly as possible. It was surprisingly easy to get the resources needed to put the chamber together. All Dr. Dodds had to do was tell the Dean of Engineering what Cesar needed. From there, Dean Kohlmeyer was more than happy to get engineers assigned to the project. Dean Kohlmeyer was extremely proud of Cesar. It seemed to fill him with a great amount of joy that one of his former students was running the city. Dr. Dodds looked at a few of the monitors sitting on the data collection table. It looked like the current test started 12 hours ago. The current temperature in the chamber was 40 degrees Fahrenheit and rising steadily at a rate of 1 degree per minute. Inside the chamber was a very frozen zombie. Said zombie was completely motionless. The zombie looked to be a male specimen that was about 6 feet tall. Its brown hair was covered in frost. It looked like it was initially overweight prior to infection. It currently was a bit trimmed down thanks to its confinement. Judging by the dried blood on its fingers, it must have been eating well prior to its capture. Dr. Dodds tapped one of the lab techs manning the data table. He asked, "Could you please pull up the historical temperature graph for the current test?" The tech nodded. He then proceeded to type a few commands into his computer. A window on the monitor popped up. It displayed a graph of the minute-over-minute average temperature of the environmental chamber over the last 13 hours. The graph looked vaguely like a bathtub. In the first hour of the test, the temperature dropped from 72 degrees to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. It stayed within a quarter of a degree of the freezing point for the next 12 hours until just recently when it started working its way back up. "Ah, Dr. Dodds, I was hoping you'd be able to join us. I really think this one might be it," a voice from behind Dr. Dodds boomed. Dr. Dodds turned around to greet Professor Wolf Langer, a good friend and fellow researcher at SCSU. Dr. Langer had a PhD in molecular biology. He was one of the other big names around campus. Since the breakdown of society, Dr. Langer transitioned towards being more of an experimentalist and less of a theoretician. As a result, Dr. Langer was spending much more time in the lab, especially over the last month. He was actually the one running the current test Dr. Dodds was here to see. "I saw your report. When I saw that you were running October 1st right now, I actually ran over here. I didn't get a chance to read the rest. Fill me in on what I missed," Dr. Dodds said excitedly. "We ran late September yesterday, and we got similar results. Ted was pretty stiff when he warmed up, but after an hour or so, he was back to normal. He started responding to stimuli, and samples indicated there was no permanent cell," Dr. Langer explained. "You named it Ted?" Dr. Dodds cut Dr. Langer off. "Yeah. It was that or Subject X. Ted won by 3 votes. Dr. Langer added with a shrug. Dr. Dodds thought he was joking, but after a few seconds, he realized that Dr. Langer was being completely serious. "I see. So then how many hours of freezing does late September correspond to?" Dr. Dodds sighed. "It depends a bit on the year. Back in 2014, we had 2 days in the 30s on the 11th and the 12th. Then you have other years where the whole month bounced between 50 and 70. It's a bit ironic, actually. If Caesar's theory is correct, but we get another summer September, global warming might have the last laugh. Although, now that I think about it, I'd wager global emissions probably drop to 0 by the 3rd week after Z-Day." Dr. Langer trailed off when he saw Dr. Dodds giving him an unimpressed look. "If you think warming is the issue, why'd you run the test with September?" Dr. Dodds asked, a bit irritated with Dr. Langer's tendency to drift during conversations. "We did an 8-hour run. That's what the report from yesterday was about. Another thing to note is that in real life, we don't just get down to freezing and stop. I mentioned this in the reports you didn't read, but usually there's a good deal of fluctuation. If the temperature oscillates below freezing, there might be increased cellular damage than just a constant freeze," Dr. Langer said. Dr. Dodds caught the jab about the report, which he found amusing. Dr. Langer was usually one to let things slide. It was interesting to see him counterpunch occasionally. "All right, I understand all of that, but then why are we testing at just freezing temperature?" Dr. Dodds asked, thinking back to the graph he looked at a few minutes ago. "For 2 reasons. Stopping at freezing is a solid conservative estimate. If we get results with just 32 degrees, then we know for sure anything lower would prove more effective," Dr. Langer answered. Dr. Dodds waited for the second reason. After an awkward pause, he finally asked, "Okay, and what about the second reason?" "Well, it's also possible that we're using 32 because we might have broken the thermostat on the HVAC system and we don't want to have to ask engineering to come back and fix it because they might have warned us about trying to manually adjust the set point and we might have ignored that and messed with it as soon as they were out of the lab." Dr. Langer trailed off again. Dr. Dodds just laughed and turned his attention back towards the chamber. Dr. Langer was something else entirely. "So, if 8 hours didn't do the trick, what makes you think 12 hours of freezing is going to work? Considering their heightened metabolism, I would anticipate that they'd be able to survive any amount of damage that might be caused by ice crystal formation." Dr. Dodd speculated more to himself than to anyone who was listening. Dr. Langer stepped to a vacant computer and pressed a few keys. Then he pointed. "This image right here is the answer to your question," he said confidently. The image was a time-lapse of a 3D heat map. It was set to loop the 8-hour test from yesterday in about 30 seconds. You'll notice that during the cycle, Ted's core temperature never drops below freezing. That means his metabolic activity was uninterrupted through the whole cooling cycle. Dr. Langer hit a few more keys and then tapped the right arrow key several times. This displayed a new time-lapse. "This is from the current cycle," he said. He didn't say anything else. From his posturing, Dr. Dodds could tell that the time-lapse was meant to speak for itself. He focused on the video. It took him a moment to figure out exactly what was special about the footage. Once he did, his jaw dropped. At the 10-hour mark, Ted's core temperature dropped to 32 degrees. That's where it stayed and was still, even though the surrounding chamber was almost back to room temperature. Dr. Langer looked at Dr. Dodds like he was eager to show off a new toy he got for Christmas. Dr. Dodds could see that he was extremely excited about the finding. Taking the bait, Dr. Dodds asked, "So you think Ted's not going to revive if we leave him at room temperature for a few hours?" "That's exactly what I think, but we'll see if I'm right shortly. He's almost ready," Dr. Langer said while pointing at the chamber. From there, it became a waiting game. Dr. Dodds visited with a number of other researchers he knew for the next 20 minutes. That's how long it took Ted's body temperature to finally climb above freezing. After that, Dr. Langer ordered the techs to crank up the heat to speed up the warming process. It took another 10 minutes, but the extra heat was effective. Quite suddenly, Ted collapsed onto the floor of the chamber. Everyone cheered initially and then cut to silence. The crowd waited to see if Ted would get back up or if he was really down for the count this time. After another 10 minutes, Dr. Langer asked 3 of the SCDF guards to come over to the test chamber. "This here is a blood oxygenation and pulse monitor," he said, holding up a small fingertip-sized device. "I need to put it on Ted's finger. If he wakes up, don't let him kill me." One of the soldiers said, "Hey, Doc, why don't you let me take care of that?" He held out his hand towards Dr. Langer. Dr. Langer pulled back instinctively, almost like a child protecting a toy from a stranger. The soldier lifted his outstretched hand as if to say, "Fine, have it your way." Then they all got into position. Everyone watched as the soldiers and Dr. Langer approached the hatch to the chamber. One of the soldiers grabbed the locking mechanism in one hand and the hatch handle in the other. Then he looked at Dr. Langer, waiting for the signal to open the hatch. Dr. Langer was standing directly in front of the hatch with a soldier on either side of him. There was a quick exchange of nods. Then everyone moved at the same time. What happened next was remarkably fluid. The whole exchange took less than 6 seconds from start to finish. The hatch opened. Dr. Langer skipped forward and knelt down. The 2 SCDF soldiers stepped forward to cover him. Meanwhile, Dr. Langer slipped the monitor onto one of the fingers on Ted's left hand. Then Dr. Langer slid back, stood up, and stepped out of the door. The 2 SCDF soldiers backed out right after he was clear. The 3rd soldier shut the door and made sure it was locked. Then everyone in the room started breathing again. Dr. Langer headed for the data collection table. There, he had one of the techs pull up the monitor's data feed. Everyone who could see watched the screen. The display indicated that Ted didn't have a pulse and that his blood was nearly depleted of oxygen. After 2 minutes, Dr. Langer finally shouted, "I'm calling it. Ted is dead, folks." The whole room exploded with cheering. Dr. Dodds himself cracked a big dorky grin. People were running around hugging each other and jumping up and down. It was like they just won the Super Bowl or something. Everyone was ecstatic. After the cheering died down, Dr. Langer climbed onto a table. From there, he announced, We'll watch Ted for a few days to make sure he's down for the count. With that said, I want to thank everyone for their work on this. It took a mountain of effort to pull all of this together as fast as you all did. I want you to know it was worth it. If Ted is dead, then the city, no, the whole world has hope again." This announcement was met with another round of cheering. While that was going on, Dr. Dodds pulled Dr. Langer down from the table. "What was that?" he asked, amazed and amused. "That right there is the best speech I've ever given," Dr. Langer said cheerfully. "So then does this mean what I think it means?" Dr. Dodds asked with a laugh. "It seems like it. At this point, I'm 95% confident that Cesar's guess was correct. Even if it isn't, what we're seeing right now is a major advantage if it isn't an outright total victory. The testing confirmed beyond a doubt that zombies freeze and become immobilized when exposed to extended periods of freezing temperatures. Within a few days, we'll know if Ted comes back to life, or at least if he comes back to being undead. Either way, this is good news," Dr. Langer squealed cheerfully. "All right, then I'll go call Cesar and let him know," Dr. Dodds said with a nod. "Tell him I want some salmon," Dr. Langer said, now completely serious. "Wait, what? You want what?" Dr. Dodds asked, now puzzled. "I want some salmon. I haven't been able to go fishing for months," Dr. Langer explained. Dr. Dodds then realized that he was experiencing another one of Dr. Langer's quirk moments, so he just smiled and nodded that he understood the request. Then he started working his way back to the containment chamber. He ended up talking to a few people on the way, which prolonged his efforts to escape. Once he was back in the hallway, he pulled out his phone. Taking care to make sure he didn't walk into anything, he dialed Cesar's number. Cesar would want to know the news right away. Who wouldn't? The phone rang twice before Cesar picked up. "Hey, Dr. Dodds, what's up?" Cesar asked. He sounded a bit tired. "I have the best news you're going to hear today, maybe even this week, if not this month," Dr. Dodds exclaimed. He was surprised to find himself more excited to deliver the news than he expected. He paused for dramatic effect. After a moment of silence, Cesar realized Dr. Dodds was waiting for him to say something, so he guessed, "You found the cure to the Z virus?" This checked Dr. Dodds' excitement considerably. He did need to be reminded about the complete and utter lack of progress on the cure. He stammered, "Well, not quite that good, but it's close. We've finished testing your hypothesis about the cold." Dr. Dodds paused for dramatic effect again. This time, Cesar took the bait right away by asking, "So what did you find?" 12 hours of freezing seems to be enough exposure to force them into a metabolic shutdown, Dr. Dodds said enthusiastically. His excitement was back. He had to fight to contain it. "Yes!" Cesar shouted, causing Dr. Dodds to nearly drop his phone. He held the phone a few inches from his ear until Cesar finished shouting. When Cesar calmed down, he asked, "So how exactly did you test this? How hard of a freeze is it going to take to kill them all?" "Well, that's the thing. We currently don't have the best temperature control, so all of our testing was done at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. We're certain that 12 hours below freezing will do the trick. With that said, obviously, time at temperature below freezing will be faster acting," Dr. Dodds answered. "All right, awesome. So were you able to figure out what the exact mechanism of action is for the whole process? What chemically happens to shut them down?" Cesar asked. "You sure ask a lot of questions, Cesar," Dr. Dodds said with a sigh. "We just figured out this worked at all about 20 minutes ago. It will be a while before we have everything worked out." "Understood. Well, keep me updated. This is truly great news," Cesar said cheerfully. "We still need to do a lot more work on this, but it looks, or at least Dr. Langer thinks, that the trigger point is when the zombie's core body temperature reaches freezing. Based on the graphs, it doesn't look like they can come back from that. But at any rate, I'll give you another call if we discover anything big. Otherwise, you can expect a full report in about a week," Dr. Dodds concluded. "Thank you, Dr. Dodds. If we're right about this, it means we just need to make it through winter. That's something we can actually work with. Unless you think it's a bad idea, I'll actually go make the announcement right now. The city could use some good news for once," Cesar said. Dr. Dodds thought for a moment before answering. He didn't want to foster false hope on the off chance Ted wasn't dead. But at the same time, it looked like Ted was pretty dead. Physics was a cruel mistress, and everyone had to follow the laws of thermodynamics. "I think the city could use some good news, too. I look forward to reading what you come up with," Dr. Dodds finally said. All right, thanks, Doctor. And a big thanks to you and your team for all of your work on this. I know the original request was a bit ridiculous, but you really came through on it, Cesar said gratefully. Honestly, think nothing of it. This has been the most meaningful research I've supervised in years. I'm just glad we were able to help the city. But on that note, Dr. Langer wants some salmon. What you do with that information is up to you. Have a good evening, Cesar. I still have some work I need to get done, Dr. Dodd said, now smiling. He wished he could see Cesar's face right now. He hung up before Cesar could answer. It took him another 10 minutes to make it back to his office. He walked extra slow on the way back to make up for running earlier. When he reached his office, he collapsed into his office chair with a big sigh of relief. Hopefully, this discovery would help increase the coffee supply.